Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome President Khama of Botswana, Ambassador Bridgette Motsepe, Mrs. Cherie Blair, and Mr. Gordon Rainey. And importantly, I would like to also welcome members of the South African and Botswana media, as well as all of the people that are listening in this moment. Today, I'll be moderator for this press conference. Before I introduce the panel and today's program, I would like to share the following housekeeping information for the media in particular. The format of the press conference is such that only the panelists will be visible and audible on your screen. You will see a Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen, so please feel free to type your questions to any of our panelists. When you do, please let us know what publication you're from or broadcasting company you're from and who your question is directed at. Our panelists will attempt to answer all questions during the Q&A sessions, but if we run out of time, we'll ensure that any unanswered questions are answered offline. The session is being recorded, a copy of which will be emailed to you after the press conference. We've also enabled the recording capabilities, so if you would like to record it yourselves, please feel free to do so. By now, you should have received a copy of the press release by email, which includes a link to the full report. We are here today to share with you the findings of an in-depth forensic investigation conducted by global law firm Omnia Strategy, which is led by Mrs. Cherie Blair, and a global business intelligence investigation firm, Alaco, represented here by Mr. Gordon Rainey. The report is titled Flies and Lies. The investigation scrutinized serious allegations of money laundering leveled against former President Khama of Botswana and Ambassador Bridgette Motsepe. These allegations were contained in an affidavit submitted by a Mr. Alaco Ltd, who is an investigator with the Botswana Directorate of Economic Crime and Corruption. In support of the state of Botswana's case against former Botswana intelligence officer Wilhelmina Maswabi, who's also known as Butterfly. The affidavit claimed that President Khama, while still in office and with the help of Botswana's former chief of intelligence, Mr. Isaac Kgosi, opened a series of bank accounts at the Bank of Botswana, the country's central bank, to funnel in excess of 10.1 billion US dollars, which amounts to 176 billion rands. Wow, that's a huge amount of money. And this money was allegedly funneled to various international and South African bank accounts. The affidavit alleged that Ambassador Motsepe was a co-signatory to a number of these accounts. The state's case against Ms. Maswabi implies that these funds were intended to be used to orchestrate political unrest in Botswana. And they were also meant to fund opposition groups against the current president of Botswana, President Mokgweetsi Masisi. You'll agree with me that these allegations are extremely serious, and they've had a profound impact on those involved. I've had an opportunity to review this report, which is aptly named Flies and lies. It is comprehensive and conclusive in its findings. And I believe it does a remarkable job of dealing with the allegations and revealing the truth. I don't want to take away the spotlight from the investigations teams that will tell us exactly what happened.
The mandate given to my law firm, Omnia Strategy, and our partners at Alaco was to scrutinize the affidavit and underlying evidence without fear or favor. The affidavit was submitted by Botswana in support of its case, Helena Motsepe.
Right, just sorry about that. Let us quickly outline for you the order of proceedings. It will be as follows. Our first speaker of the day is Ms. Cherie Blair, CBE QC, who is co-founder and partner at global law firm Omnia Strategy. She will provide the introductory remarks to the investigation and findings. Ms. Cherie Blair will be followed by Gordon Rainey, Associate Director at Alaco, which will take you through both the allegations and the findings. It will also give you a full account of the methodology followed in conducting the investigation. We will then conduct a Q&A focused on the investigation and report, and this will be followed by a brief address by Ambassador Bridgette Motsepe, and our final speaker will be His Excellency, President Khama. There'll then be a further Q&A, during which time you may address your questions to both President Khama and Ambassador Motsepe. I will then close this press conference with a few thoughts of my own, and we hope to be done within an hour. I'm now called upon the chief investigator of this matter, Ms. Cherie Blair. Over to you, dear colleague.
Thank you so much, Professor Madonsela, for those introductory words, and thank you too to the press corps from South Africa, Botswana, across Africa, and indeed around the world for joining us today. Several weeks ago, I was instructed to undertake an independent investigation into very serious allegations made in court proceedings in Botswana. These allegations arose in what is known as the butterfly case, and they are contained in an affidavit in October 2019. The mandate given to my law firm Omnia Strategy and our partners at Alaco was to scrutinize the affidavit and the underlying evidence without fear or favor. The affidavit was submitted by Botswana in support of its case against Wilhelmina Motsepe, known as Butterfly. That affidavit, in UK we'd call it a witness statement, and its annexes were prepared by an individual called Jacko Hubona. He's an investigator with Botswana's Directorate on Corruption and Economic Crime. And copies of that affidavit are among the bundles distributed to you. And at paragraph 2, you'll see he swears under oath that the facts are true and correct. Well, we have completed our investigation. We have tested the evidence in the affidavit, and we have demonstrated in our report, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the statement that the facts disposed to are true and correct is not merely misleading, but actually complete and utter fallacy. While it's been a privilege for Omnia and Alaco to carry out this investigation, it gives us no satisfaction to share conclusions that cast an uncomfortable light on the disturbing events in Botswana, which require urgent attention. Since its independence in 1966, Botswana has regularly been held up as a shining example of an African success story, with a consistent record of uninterrupted democratic elections and low levels of corruption. Indeed, just last year, the President Masisi visited the Otsi Police College and declared, "I would like to remind you that our success is anchored on the rule of law, which we should as a nation continue to uphold and jealously protect in order to safeguard our democracy." However, Our investigations reveal that the rule of law in Botswana has been subverted with an egregious prosecution which should never have been brought, and it raises questions about why it was advanced in the first place. After we outline our findings in this press conference, you may reach the same view that we have. This case is simply a scandal and a national tragedy which is seriously damaged and is seriously damaging Botswana's hard-run reputation. But first, recalling President Mosepe's welcome emphasis on the rule of law, we all know that in principle, the concept is a great leveler. Everyone, from president to pauper, from tycoon to the lowliest worker, is equal before the law. Unfortunately, that is not the reality in many parts of the world, and we are seeing a worrying trend towards the weaponizing of the criminal law by those with influence to undermine opponents, whether in business or in politics. Sometimes this is a deliberate plan, but other times it happens due to the neglect of the core institutions that guard the criminal justice system. The judges, the prosecutors, the lawyers, the police, the prison service, and of course, a free press, which can expose failures, hold the corrupt or incompetent to account, and help uphold and champion the rule of law. There were times when examining the evidence put forward to support the prosecution in this case, that it was impossible to fathom how any competent prosecutor could seriously have concluded there was any reasonable basis on which to proceed to a prosecution. In some instances, it seems as if the prosecutors involved have deliberately turned a blind eye to obvious factual errors and instead relied on stolen or fictitious corporate and banking data to sustain bogus allegations. For example, Habona asserts that $48 million was transferred to the bank account of one Kagetham Pty Limited. But this is absolutely contradicted by an affidavit by the owner of that account, given to the Botswana prosecutors before they swore that affidavit, where he says clearly no transaction has taken place. But that affidavit was not disclosed to the court. In a moment, our team will unpack our report and set out a host of other glaring anomalies and outright falsehoods that characterize the Habona affidavit. As you listen, consider how, if we have been able to expose the evidence that there has been put before the court in October 2019 as a work of fiction in just a few weeks, how can that have been beyond the prosecuting team on this case in Botswana? It's impossible to avoid the conclusion that if Habona's allegations had been properly investigated, it would have been obvious to any reasonable and fair-minded prosecutor that the case should be abandoned for lack of credible evidence and for doubts over the integrity of the state's witness. Instead, the court in Botswana, the media and the public at large have been presented with an affidavit where fake news, spurious allegations, clumsily manufactured evidence and baseless accusations inform a preposterous conspiracy theory riddled with fantasies, inaccuracies and blatant falsehoods, with a fantastical script involving former presidents, spies and billions of Pula, US dollars and rands. If this affidavit is to be believed, the 107 billion Pula alleged to have been stolen would account for more than half the value of the entire economy of Botswana. In my opinion, the case presented by the state in this affidavit exhibits a storyline more worthy of Austin Powers than James Bond. The matter would deserve little more than ridicule if only the state's case did not have such a devastating effect on the people targeted and caught up in this web of lies. Moreover, this affidavit and its contents represents an attack on the dignity of South Africa and tarnishes its financial and governmental institutions. While the defendant herself, Wilhelmina Motsepe, has fortunately been released on bail by the court, she still has this prosecution hanging over her with no end in sight. In fact, just this Monday, Botswana's Director of Public Prosecutions requested the case be set down for a status hearing in November 2020, over a year later, to allow more time for investigations. Our report should save the DPP some time. Returning to the impact of the state's case, besides the accused, others too have had their names besmirched by the baseless allegations made by the prosecution, including, of course, the former president of Botswana, Ian Khama, Isaac Kuzozi, Botswana's former chief of intelligence, and Ambassador Bridgette Motsepe, who I'm sure is well known to many here in South Africa and around the world as a prominent African businesswoman and an ambassador of the Pan-African Parliament. And alongside these high-profile figures, you will read in our report of ordinary people caught up in this convoluted web of bogus charges. From a German vintage aviation enthusiast, Klaus Colling, to Rosa Peralta and Beatriz Cardozo from the US and Uruguay, two small businesswomen importing commodities into America from Latin America. In each case, the recklessness of these hollow allegations risks inevitable harm and unnecessary suffering. No more so than for President Khama. After a career of public service, first as a distinguished figure in the military, then as a politician leading his country, and now as a globally recognized conservationist, his legacy is impugned by the state's case without a shred of credible evidence. Ambassador Motsepe has not only had to face the disruption that these groundless charges filed by the Botswanan government has brought to her business activities, but she's also had to defend herself from shabby attacks to her reputation and integrity, published widely in Botswana, in South Africa, and beyond. But it's not just individuals that have suffered. This case besmirches the reputation of the Reserve Bank of South Africa itself and 7 other blameless South African banks. The affidavit states that the Reserve Bank gave clearance for the stolen money to be deposited into a South African bank account. This exposes the Reserve Bank of South Africa and the banks to reputational risk and who knows what other damage. In addition, we've seen recent criticisms from the representatives of Botswana targeting South Africa's Department of Justice, its National Prosecuting Authority, and the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. This should never have been allowed to happen. Fact-checking and verification are the only bastion that we have to defend ourselves from falsehood and fabricated hatred. This is why when Omnia Strategy and Alaco were commissioned to produce our independent report, I was pleased to be given the opportunity to sift through the prosecution case and deploy my professional expertise to assist in shining a light on the truth of this matter. When we started out, I could never have imagined how outrageous the evidence is on which the state's case is based, and how quickly the case would reveal itself to be a pack of lies. As I stated earlier, undermining the rule of law damages everyone, and this has sadly proved to be true, with the harm extending to Botswana on an international level. In May of this year, the EU amended its regulation on anti-money laundering and terrorist financing to include for the first time Botswana in the table of countries that it noted as being of high risk from these scourges because of their deficiencies. And for Botswana, the EU expressly identified 6 areas of concern, including, significantly, the insufficient capacity of the law enforcement agencies in relation to the investigations of terrorist financing. It may be that the failures in the butterfly case can be explained by a lack of capacity among Botswana's law enforcement agencies. Or it may be that more sinister forces are at work. These are questions beyond the scope of our report, but which I suggest warrant further attention. In any event, if the system in Botswana cannot or will not detect the obvious and striking errors in this case, what hope is there when an actual case of money laundering or terrorist financing confronts the state's prosecutors? I would like to make 2 points in conclusion. First, I hope that the categorical findings in our report put to bed once and for all the baseless allegations in the affidavit concerning President Khama and Ambassador Motsepe, so that they can move on with their lives and their reputations untouched. And I hope too that the besmirching of South Africa's reputation will stop. And secondly, I wish and hope that Botswana's prosecution authority will take advantage of the analysis in this report and swiftly move to drop this flawed prosecution. This is the only way that faith in the long-standing integrity of the rule of law in Botswana can be restored. Thank you for your time. I will now hand over to Gordon Rainey from Alaco, who will deliver a brief summary of the detail of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherie, and also Professor Madonsela for your remarks. It has been a true pleasure to work with both of you on this matter, alongside a host of other dedicated advisors at Alaco, Omnia Strategy, Weber Wenzel in South Africa, and many others besides, on this very pressing matter, one which I think has impacted not only the reputations of upstanding citizens, public servants, and a former head of state, but also that of Botswana itself and the rule of law. I think before turning to the results of our investigation, which I will walk through with you on a presentation format, I think members of the press and others present would benefit from a very brief description of myself and the firm that I represent. I began my career as an attorney in New York and then in London before entering the business intelligence sector over 10 years ago. As to the firm, Alaco was established in London in 2002 and is uniformly regarded as a market leader in the field of complex investigations and strategic intelligence. We are engaged in a wide variety of scenarios where the acquisition and analysis of information is required, and that is often in the context of ongoing or anticipated legal proceedings, as in this case. I think Professor Madonsela and Cherie have spoken very eloquently on the broader issues. My job and that of my colleagues at Alaco and Omnia has been to scrutinize the affidavit submitted by Jaco Hubana on behalf of the state of Botswana. And we have done so in a very independent and dispassionate manner, always with an eye for detail and for discrepancy. As I think you will see, there has been a great deal to discredit. I will now walk you through the key findings of our investigation, and I would describe these as a summary of the information you will receive in our report, which is now publicly available on Omnia's website. Now, if you'll bear with me one moment to share my screen, I will then, one moment, please. I hope and trust you can now see the first slide in our presentation. So just briefly, as to the mandate, now both Professor Madonsela and Cherie Blair have spoken in broad strokes on this matter, so I won't take too much time on it. Only to note that we were, as both have said, engaged to scrutinize this affidavit, and most specifically, we focused our attentions on a series of alleged fund flows originating in Botswana, circulating across various parts of the globe, and ultimately it is alleged coming down into South Africa and falling into a wide variety of bank accounts, many of which Ambassador Motsepe is said to be a signatory on. We will go through all of that in great detail in a moment, but I would just note, as evidenced by the number of you who have joined us today, and also the large amount of press this has garnered in the past 6 months, it has been the subject of very widespread publicity in both Botswana and South Africa, and in the broader region and internationally. And to state the obvious, both President Khama and Ambassador Motsepe have consistently maintained that these allegations are false with no evidential basis, and thus we were engaged to independently verify that position. As Professor Madonsela said at the front of this press conference, I want to take just a bit of time to explain to you what we did and how we did it. We are an investigations and intelligence firm. A very large part of our work typically involves, and certainly has in this case, a thorough review of all publicly available information. Now, in this case, and as you'll see in a moment, a wide variety of jurisdictions are involved and implicated in the Hubana affidavit. So as part of our work, we have undertaken thorough and detailed open source research, and by that I mean publicly available documentation such as corporate records, filings, litigation records, etc., across a wide variety of jurisdictions, and that includes South Africa, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States, and others besides, I would add. Now, in addition to that desktop work, shall we say, we have contacted and engaged with a wide variety of companies, individuals, and banking institutions who are referenced in this affidavit. Now, in those discussions, we were regularly trying to understand whether these fund flows and the other allegations in the affidavit are supported by the facts. Now, just quickly, the key findings, and then I will turn to a review of the allegations and then addressing each one of them in turn. So it is our opinion that the affidavit, while itself is authentic, it was a legitimately submitted legal document in ongoing proceedings, a substantial amount of the content therein is a fabrication. Now, this runs the gamut from seemingly very minor errors and inconsistencies, such as typographical errors, to glaring inaccuracies and falsehoods. And for these reasons, we feel that the document overall lacks any credibility and offers no reliable evidence to support the allegations against President Khama, Ambassador Motsepe, and others who are implicated in this affidavit. Now, while this is beyond the scope of our instructions, one does wonder, having spent a number of weeks looking at this affidavit, it raises serious questions about what the motivations were behind the affidavit and its authors, be it exclusively Mr. Hubona or others working alongside him. But as I say, that is beyond the scope of our mandate and won't specifically be what I'm addressing now. So turning just quickly to the allegations themselves, in a general sense, the affidavit alleges that in 2008, while serving as head of state, President Khama arranged for the opening of 3 special unit accounts at the Bank of Botswana, which is that country's national reserve bank, after which large sums of cash flowed out of at least one of these accounts to a number of international financial institutions. We will go into more detail on that in a moment. As Professor Madonsela noted earlier, the alleged outflow overall was as much as 10.1 billion US dollars, which I believe is roughly 107 billion pula, which is a staggering amount considering what the estimated GDP of Botswana is. This 10.1 billion would amount to about 55% of that. So I'd encourage you to bear that in mind when assessing the credibility of this affidavit. And ultimately, as I noted, it's alleged that a significant amount of these funds flowed into a variety of South African and offshore bank accounts over which Ambassador Motsepe is said to be a signatory. As others have alluded to, whilst we are speculating to a degree, the state's argument appears to be that both President Khama and Ambassador Motsepe were intending to use these funds to orchestrate political unrest and fund opposition groups against President Masisi in Botswana. So let's turn to the allegations specifically as they are lodged with respect to the fund flows in the affidavit. And I'm going to address each of them in turn. You all will have a copy of the affidavit, which is included as one of the first exhibits in our report, which is now publicly available on Omnia's and Alaco's website. And the allegations around the fund flows all sit within paragraph 19 of that affidavit, which is where we will focus our discussion now. Now, in paragraph 19.2, it is alleged that the money departed Botswana in 2009, initially to an account held in the name of Odyssey Energy LLC at HSBC in Hong Kong. And it is alleged in the affidavit that 107 million pula, translating to roughly 16 million US dollars, was transferred in 2009 at that time. It then went on from HSBC in Hong Kong to a company called Flugwerk at an account in Deutsche Bank in Germany. Now, that alleged transfer was for an amount of 100 million. And then on to a broker or financial expert, as yet unidentified, I will come to that shortly, who apparently parceled out hundreds of millions of US dollars and or euros in the form of monthly dividends, it's described in the affidavit, to a wide variety of companies. Carrying on in 19.2, this Mr. McGregor then apparently made these dividend payments, which I referred to a moment ago, to a wide variety of companies, it says in the affidavit, but the affidavit only lists two specifically. The first is to an account held in the name of Atlantic Beverage Solutions, with that corporate suffix following on, at Citibank in Miami. They were lucky to receive 100 million US dollars. And also to a bank in Jakarta called Makota Bank, also receiving $100 million. Makota Bank then supposedly sent a large amount of funds to Standard Bank in South Africa, and Cherie Blair mentioned this in her remarks, the USD $48 million into the account of Kagetham Pty Limited at Standard Bank in Alberton, excuse me. Now, in paragraph 19.3, it is alleged that once these funds arrived in South Africa in the Kagetham account, large amounts were then passed down into accounts held in the names of three companies: Blue Flies, Fireflies, and Lazarus Motor Company. Now, 19.8 alleges that Ambassador Motsepe was a signatory, or is a signatory, to the Blue Flies and Fireflies company bank accounts. And then the affidavit goes on to list a large number of offshore, what it is called offshore, and we are somewhat assuming that what is meant by that is non-Botswanan, so possibly South African, though it's very difficult to tell from the language in the affidavit. But that large sums of money in excess of 1 billion ultimately fell into a wide variety of accounts held in the names of Blue Flies and Fireflies. Now that, I would encourage you, obviously, after this press conference to read the affidavit in close detail to get the full recitation of the allegations, but those are the key allegations with respect to the fund flows. So now I want to sort of reverse and go back through each of those again and focus on the facts as we have uncovered in the course of our research. Now, first of all, as I said, it was alleged that funds were initially transferred out of the Bank of Botswana in 2009 to Odyssey Energy at HSBC in Hong Kong. This is completely impossible. Odyssey Energy as a corporate entity did not exist until 2013. That is 4 years after the alleged transfer. We have had conversations with Mr. Brian Pallone, who is the owner of that company and is named in the Hubona affidavit as the account signatory. He has formally denied in a written statement that this transfer ever happened. He has provided supporting documentation, and we have independently verified through corporate record searches that his company did not exist at the time. And furthermore, HSBC, the bank, has denied seeing any evidence in its records of this transaction. Well, as we said earlier, the funds then apparently moved on to Flugwerk at Deutsche Bank in Germany. That also is an impossibility. Flugwerk's account at Deutsche Bank, and it does maintain an account at Deutsche Bank, but it was not opened until 2018. That is 9 years after the alleged transfer. We also have had conversations with the owner of that company, Mr. Klaus Colling, who Cherie Blair mentioned in her remarks. He also has formally denied in a written statement that any of this occurred. Deutsche Bank separately has confirmed that the account was not opened until 2018. Moving on, the transfer of funds in 2013 to Atlantic Beverage Solutions in the United States. This also is a complete impossibility. The company did not assume the corporate name referenced in the affidavit until April 2014. That was some 6 months after the alleged transfer. These allegations also have been formally denied by the account holder, Ms. Rosa Maria Peralta, along with supporting evidence in a written statement by that company. Makota Bank, which is the bank I referenced in Jakarta, which is also alleged to have received a substantial amount of funds from this man named Colin McGregor. is not a regulated or registered financial institution in Indonesia or anywhere else as far as we can surmise. It is widely viewed online as a fake bank and a known vehicle for financial scams. While it is a corporate entity, I would add, it was only incorporated, I believe, in 2019. That is some 5 years following the alleged movement of funds into its account from Mr. Colin McGregor. Now, we have had people on the ground in Jakarta visit the registered address from Makota Bank and found absolutely no evidence of a bank there, and certainly a very modest residential address, maintaining some corporate entities, but certainly not this entity. Now, I think there is a common thread across each of these steps in the international fund flow, and that is that each of these individuals, Klaus Colling at Flugwerk and Deutsche Bank, Brian Pallone with HSBC, Rosa Maria Peralta with Atlantic Beverage Solutions, each one of them confirmed to us that yes, in large part, our account details, not the transactions alleged, but the account details as included in the affidavit are accurate. However, each of them pointed us to instances in the past 12 to 24 months where their personal and corporate banking data was compromised as part of a data breach. Now, it has not been our job to uncover exactly how and why and through what means Mr. Hubono or others working with him in the Botswana government secured this data. But what seems patently obvious at this point is that with respect to all of these alleged fund flows in paragraph 19.2, is that these individuals each had their data stolen, and that data was acquired somehow by the Botswana government, or Mr. Hubono at least, in order to populate this affidavit and lend the allegations a veneer of credibility. And speaking as someone who's been in this line of work for a number of years, I can tell you that this is frighteningly easy to do via the dark web or any other means of acquisition to purchase a cache of legitimate but illegitimately acquired banking data to use for any number of reasons. And it seems quite clear that that is the case here. Each of these organizations, the details of their banking affairs are currently accurate, but in most cases did not even exist in 2009 or 2013 in some cases. So that seems to be how this data was put in by the Botswana government. Now, moving on to the transfer into South Africa, and Mrs. Blair spoke a little bit on this as well. An affidavit was already submitted in the butterfly case in Gaborone by the sole director and shareholder of Kagetham, Prince Komagotso Mogotala, in which he confirmed that their account did not receive a transfer of 48 million from Makota Bank, I would add, which we've demonstrated is not a legitimate banking institution. And he provided that affidavit, which a month or more before the Hubono affidavit was submitted, the latter who seems to have completely ignored the Kagetham affidavit. Now, and also, the South African bank has officially confirmed that it has no evidence of clearing the 48 million inflow from Makota Bank in Indonesia or anywhere else for that matter, as is their legal obligation to do for funds in that amount. So I think taken together, we view these, the South African bank's commentary on this and the affidavit from Kagetham as and the lack of an existent financial institution on the sending end of this transfer, we view all of these as fairly dispositive in rebutting the allegation. Furthermore, and this is where Ambassador Motsepe's interest in this becomes particularly relevant, as I noted at the beginning, it is alleged in this affidavit that she is a signatory on a wide variety of accounts held across a number of financial institutions in the names of Blue Flies and Fireflies. These are fabricated entities. We have carried out corporate record searches in South Africa, which, whilst it does not state explicitly in the affidavit that these companies are South African, there is a heavy implication, I think, that that is what the Hubona affidavit is intending to say. So obviously that is where we started. There is no evidence of any company, current or historical, bearing the names of blue flies or fireflies with any corporate suffix. And I would note, when you read the affidavit, you might note the sloppiness in which at times it is referred to as Inc., at times it is referred to as PTY, PTY Limited. These and other silly errors have made our work rather challenging to understand what exactly is being alleged. But in any event, we went through all of the corporate suffixes and found no evidence of any companies bearing these names. Furthermore, we then did more broad-based global searches and identified no names of any relevant entities with these names. Now, I think we've demonstrated quite comprehensively that these companies do not exist. So the next point may strike you somewhat moot, but we have managed to secure, and I say we rather liberally, with respect to the South African banks implicated and named in this affidavit. A tremendous amount of credit should go to Dario Milo and his team at Weber Wenzel for their efforts in engaging with the South African banks, and I will show a slide listing those in a moment. But almost every bank named in this affidavit, and every single South African bank named in this affidavit, has resoundingly denied that Ambassador Motsepe is a signatory over any such accounts, and even that these accounts exist. This is, again, what we think pretty dispositive and compelling evidence that these companies and these accounts have been made up. I would note that these bank letters are also available as an exhibit in our report. I mentioned the accounts. Now, in the affidavit, it is alleged that there are 17 accounts across these two companies, of which Motsepe is said to be a signatory. Of those, 14 are held across a number of South African banks, and you see them listed here with the number of accounts at each. And outside South Africa, there are 3 banks which are named, being HSBC, RBS, and Deutsche Bank. Now, of all of these, 15 of 17 have officially confirmed that there are no such accounts and that the ambassador is not a signatory. That is all 14 that sit in South Africa, as well, excuse me, as HSBC abroad. Now, the fact that we only have 15 out of 17, I think should not be overly read into. We have not heard the opposite from the other 2, i.e. that they have such accounts. We are simply waiting to hear back from them. And we have every reason to believe that A, we will be hearing from them soon, and that their response will be exactly the same as the 15 before. So what have the South African and the Botswana Reserve Banks confirmed? This is very important because it is alleged, of course, that this began in Botswana at that country's Reserve Bank. Now, the governor of the Bank of Botswana itself, Mr. Perelio, he has confirmed to Botswanan parliamentarians that the money never left the bank. He went on to say that, frankly, the central bank had never had that amount of money in its accounts in the first place. And again, as I alluded to at the beginning of my remarks, if this were to be believed, we are talking about an outflow of as much as 55% of Botswana's economy as measured by its GDP, which is a staggering amount of money and frankly unbelievable. And again, I and my colleagues have been doing this for quite a while, and we have certainly seen a lot of yarns and a lot of fabrications in the course of our careers. And in my experience, if you want to make something up, you would do well to try to make it a believable story. And this is just not believable on a number of fronts, not the least of which is the numbers involved. Now, with respect to the South African bank, again, as I mentioned earlier, they have confirmed on the record, and this is part of our report in the way of an exhibit, that these funds were never cleared as coming into the South African financial system, as is that Reserve Bank's legal obligation to do, i.e. to clear those funds. So, in conclusion, and again, I would just stress, this has been a summary. I would really encourage you to read first the affidavit in its entirety, and then our report and its exhibits in their entirety. But to conclude this summary, we do believe that these allegations are all completely fabricated. It's characterized by inconsistencies, errors, and falsehoods. I have not touched upon those very much in my remarks today. It would frankly take far too long, but I think you will agree when you read it, it is a shockingly sloppy and unprofessional document. Now, all of the critical individuals and entities implicated in the international aspects of these fund flows have each officially confirmed to us in written statements and signed statements that they never received or sent funds as alleged in the affidavit. The banks named as holding accounts implicated in these funds have refuted the allegations. The reserve banks in Botswana and South Africa have confirmed that the funds never left Botswana or entered South Africa as alleged in the affidavit. And perhaps most critically, the entities that underpin the state's case against Ambassador Motsepe, President Ian Khama, and others, blue flies and fireflies, they simply do not exist. And as such, Ambassador Motsepe herself could not be a signatory to non-existent bank accounts. That is a brief overview of the work we have done. I'm going to unshare my screen now, if I may. Please bear with me one moment. And I am very happy to field any relevant questions as part of the Q&A session, but I believe now, Professor Madonsela, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you, Gordon Rainey, and thank you to my colleague, Cherie Blair. We've heard that blue flies don't exist. Blue flies and fireflies don't exist. And according to the report, it's all lies. We've been told that, or the report confirms that the allegations are baseless. The investigation or the prosecution should never have happened. It has had the impact of maligning the names of not just the people whose names are mentioned, but also the financial institutions in South Africa and Botswana. That this undermines the rule of law. We've heard how the investigation was conducted, and also that the Botswana law enforcement agencies could have done the same thing. Let us hear from you, ladies and gentlemen, on your questions and comments to our panelists. Our panelists are going to be Mrs. Cherie Blair, Gordon Rainey, and their teams should they want somebody else to participate. All right, let's see.
Can you see them?
Q&A, but I'm not seeing the messages. Right, I'm looking for your messages, dear colleagues. Please bear with me. This is chart. Oh, yes. Here are the questions, dear colleagues. Angela Coppola wants to know who paid for the investigation and what did it cost. Firstly, I would like to ask the colleagues that are going to be asking questions, kindly indicate who must answer your questions and which institution do you come from. But for now, I'm going to ask any of the two colleagues to quickly answer your questions. From Angela Coppola, there are two questions. One is, who paid for the investigation and what did it cost?
Well, let me answer that one quickly. Ambassador Motsepe paid for the report, As for the details of how much it costs, fortunately, I don't have to be bothered with that, so I'm afraid I don't have those details. I also saw there was a question about how did the investigators get information from the South African authorities when the Botswana government claimed that they have not been assisted. All I can say is that as far as I can see, this case has basically been trialed by media. And as I understand it, the South African authorities have responded to media reports, which are publicly available, and that's how we know about it as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you to Mrs. Cherie Blair. The second question that was answered by our colleague, Mrs. Cherie Blair, was from Philemon Meso, who was asking how did the investigation get information from the South African authorities when the Botswana government, they were not assisted. The second question from Angela Coppola is, please confirm whether this report will be shared with the Botswana judicial officials investigating the allegations. Again, any of the two colleagues may answer the question.
Can I? This
Yes,
is Gordon.
please.
I will address this. The report is currently shared with anyone on planet Earth who wishes to read it. It is available on both Alaco and Omnia's website. So the Botswanan authorities are very welcome to access it there alongside anyone else.
Right, and then there's a question from Corinne Duplessis. If your funds were paid by Ambassador Bridgette Motsepe and former President Ian Khama, what are the chances that you'll mention any adverse or damaging information that you might have found against them? What would you say to those who question your objectivity?
Certainly, I'm happy to answer that. First of all, President Khama did not pay for the report. It was Ambassador Motsepe. Secondly, I would say that we were expressly instructed by her to do this report without fear or favor. And if we had found anything, I can assure you that it, as my 45 years as a lawyer's reputation is at stake, we would have revealed what we had seen, because that was our express instructions from our clients and our obligation if we're going to make a proper research into that. But the reality is, as those of you who will look at this report will see, if you just read the affidavit, it doesn't read very convincingly. And as soon as you investigate, when we started this, of course, I thought there might be things we would find. But the reality is, all we have found, as we said before, are lies and fabrication and non-existent accounts and non-existent transfers and an unbelievable amount of money. Those facts, I think, speak for themselves. There is nothing for the president or the ambassador to answer, because there is no proof any of these transactions took place.
Thank you, Mrs. Cherie Blair. Dear colleagues, please continue to post your questions. The next question to any of our panelists is again from Corinne Duplessis. How will you be making these reports available to the prosecution's authority in Botswana upon request, formally, or in what capacity? Can I ask you, Gordon, to answer that question, please?
Certainly, Professor. I mean, as I said earlier, they are publicly available on both of our websites. That being said, we are perfectly happy to provide a report from if anyone contacts us directly, or for that matter, the legal counsel for President Ian Khama, or the legal counsel for Ambassador Motsepe at Weber Wenzel. We are very happy to provide them with a full copy of the report. I would also note, just to further add to my answer earlier on the same matter, that a link to this report is also included in the press release, which was made live concurrently with the commencement of this press conference.
Thank you. Some colleagues have said that they do have questions. We can only receive your questions if they are submitted in writing. The next question is from Franny Rapkin from the Sunday Times. Did the investigation attempt to interview Mr. Hubona or anyone from the Botswana prosecuting authority? And if so, what was the outcome? You must remember, dear colleagues, that Mr. Khubona is the person who penned this affidavit, and he's an investigator in Botswana's commercial investigation agency. Right, any of the two colleagues, will you please answer Franny Rapkin's question?
Gordon, maybe you could answer that?
Sure, Cherie. I mean, I think, you know, our view on that was we and Omnia were mandated to analyze the four corners of this affidavit and everything within it. So I think it could best be described as doing our initial diligence on the affidavit that was submitted on behalf of the state of Botswana. We did not see the necessity at this point to request or hold an interview with Jaco Khubona or anyone else. They now have a copy or can access very easily a copy of our report, our research, our findings. And it is now, the ball is now in their court to respond. We're very happy, I think, down the road to have a dialogue with them if they take issue with our findings. But that would be our position. Cherie, you may have something to add, but that's my thoughts.
Of course, we're always happy to assist the Botswanan state authorities. And as I said in my remarks, we very much hope that when they see this report, that they will want to consider again the contents of this affidavit. However, what I would say is that the affidavit was made public in October 2019. Just Monday, the prosecutor asked for more time to investigate. The reality is this has been a trial by media. These allegations have been made in public in the media, have been speculated about in the media, and we're very happy that our response will now also be in the media, and any fair-minded observer looking at this report will see quite clearly how weak and indeed non-existent the prosecution case is.
Thank you, Mrs. Cherie Blair. The next question is from Ms. Sophie Mukwena from the SABC. She's the foreign editor. She is asking, have the two clients given any indication on what action they will be taking on this matter going forward?
I think the answer to that really is I know that both the ambassador and the president will be making some remarks after we've taken our question and answer, and possibly that will be the time for that question to be dealt with.
Thank you, ma'am. To me, somebody is asking, do you think this case is jeopardizing diplomatic relations between Botswana and South Africa? Don't you think by releasing this report, it is tantamount to discussing merits of a case which is still before courts in Botswana, hence contempt? Since the question is being asked to me, no. Firstly, I don't know what Botswana law says, but I presume that Botswana is a signatory to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and SADC protocols relating to human rights. And ideally, this matter should have firstly been investigated preliminarily before being prosecuted. And the people who are accused or besmirched from this report should have been dealt with properly through a preliminary investigation before they were prosecuted. So I don't think by the parties concerned releasing a report that points to the fact that something was fabricated against them, they are poisoning relations between South Africa and Botswana. If there's anything that has poisoned relations between Botswana and South Africa, it's these allegations, because you're alleging that the Reserve Bank of South Africa was a party to illicit financial flows. Then we have Mr. Simnikiwe Hla. Miss Simnikiwe Hlachaneni, will you be using this report to sue the government of Botswana? And is Omnia going to be representing you in that lawsuit? I think we will not answer this one for now, Sinikiwe, because Ambassador Motsepe and President Khama are going to speak pretty soon after this. For that reason, then I am going to, God, sorry, I seem to be jumping. McDonald, Africa Report, there's no question next to your name. We have another question from Philemon Meso. What do they hope to achieve with these self-investigations? Okay, that will go to the two accused persons. And then to Ms. Cherie Blair, Andrew McDonald wants to know, what should South African institutions learn from this? And does this herald a new precedence in fake news, in the weaponizing of criminal law in the region? Over to you, Ms. Cherie Blair.
Yes, well, I'm afraid that there has been a worrying tendency of weaponizing criminal law across the world and making allegations, unfounded allegations, and using the criminal law processes for political purposes. I think of a case that I'm involved in that's been in the news a lot in relation to Marsha Lavareza, who is in Kuwait at the moment, that has been taken to the UN bodies. And I'm also thinking of Joyce Banda at one time. Now, of course, there's a new president in Malawi, but she has also herself suffered these matters being used against her by her successor. So I'm afraid it does happen. I'm glad to say, in relation to the fake news, that South Africa has responded to the fake news by making these declarations that the Reserve Bank has made quite publicly, that these funds did not come through South Africa, and responded therefore to publicly made allegations in the press, through the press, which I think hopefully will put this matter to rest.
Thank you, Mrs. Blair. Andrew Wer is asking, Andrew Wer from Africa Confidential is asking, Omnia and Alaco have presented a compelling, comprehensive report. However, regardless of the allegations and claims against her by Botswana, is Ambassador Motsepe financially supporting any political parties or movements in Botswana? And did she provide any material support to Pelononi Benson Moidoi before she abandoned her bid to lead the Botswana Democratic Party? I'm going to leave this to Ambassador Motsepe. I do think, though, that we've called this press briefing, which is supposed to only take 2 hours, to just focus on the Huboni allegations. And perhaps some of these things can be dealt with Ambassador Motsepe and others directly in a different platform, simply because we are running out of time, dear colleagues. I apologize for that. Okay. I seem to be unable to go down to after Karen Duplessis said thank you. Stephen Modise hasn't indicated where he is from. Professor Madonsela, is it not rather unusual for accused persons to investigate themselves and then publish findings in favor of themselves? Legally, how credible are such findings? I would say yes, it's unusual. In fact, when I was brought into the process, I thought it was unfair that they had to investigate themselves. I thought the journalists that looked at the affidavit should never have published the story, because similar allegations were made against me with similar fabricated reports with no bank statements. I was supposed to be in company with Mrs. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. I was supposed to be a spy having accounts all over the world, but just sitting down with the journalists showing how ridiculous was the information put together enabled them to deal with it properly. So I was surprised that an affidavit that is just clearly defective just from a first reading of it would lead to a prosecution and also lead to big media stories. So I do agree with you that it shouldn't have been them doing this. It should have been, firstly, Mr. Huboni, who's an investigator and therefore has a duty to scrutinize whatever allegations are given to him before he goes forward with them. And certainly the prosecution in Botswana should have done that. And because these allegations are not just against these two people or three, they're also against the financial institutions in two countries. Karen Moon is asking, these allegations are being made under oath by Botswana prosecuting authorities. Do you have any sense of why they would make false allegations under oath? Just to correct there, that the allegations are not made by the prosecution, they're made by an investigator with the Commercial Investigation Agency in Botswana. But Mrs. Cherie Blair and Mr. Gordon Rainey, which one of you is going to answer our reporter?
Obviously, I'll answer. Obviously, we can't know what was going on in Mr. Habona's mind. He's made an affidavit under oath. There are two possibilities. He genuinely believes these to be true, in which case I'm afraid his competence as an investigator has to be called into account, or he doesn't believe that they are true but is making them anyway. I have no idea, and it's for others to judge.
Thank you, ma'am. Gordon, do you want to say anything?
I can do no better than Cherie's words. She's hit the nail on the head. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're now going to move to Mrs. Ambassador Bridgette Motsepe and President Ian Khama. The last question was going to be from Botswana Ngatane, and it is to President Khama anyway. And President, if you give us your statement, bear in mind that Ntakwana Ngatane is asking, President Khama, will you be taking legal action against the government of Botswana for reputational damage? Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask now to move over to asking, firstly, Ambassador Bridgette Motsepe to make her statement. Then we're going to move to President Ian Khama. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Advocate Thuli Madonsela. I'm sitting here very alarmed and quite in shock because I grew up in Botswana, partly because my university degree I got there. And I'm a product of a great country that has contributed towards assisting with this university degree. Now, I also grew up in a country where we have been subjected as South Africans to severe character assassination, black propaganda, and severe abuse by the agents of the previous racist regimes that did not want black or white South Africa, that were resisting the human rights. And I find that in 2020, when I thought I'd never go through this, that I had to live whatever I went through in this country prior to 1994, when President Nelson Mandela stood with dignity and great respect to take his oath as the first Black president of a country that has been more than 300 years subjected to severe racism. But what shocks me is that the country that assisted me to be where I am, because we were expelled from the university where I was because we striked against voluntary education, and Botswana was very uniquely generous to accept me as a student. And then I studied, and I find that the government agents, because if you look at clause 4 of the affidavit, it says very clearly, Habona says under oath to a court case, very clearly, that supporting the affidavit, and he says it under oath, is the national security, state security, national intelligence, and police. But what shocks me is that it doesn't just stop there, where they are now, terrorizing all those that have been wrongly accused in the affidavit. But they also include the governor, our Reserve Bank of South Africa, in clause 19.7 of the affidavit. But it goes beyond that. If you look at the whole clause 19 to clause 20, 7 bank accounts in South Africa that are very dignified banks are also falsely accused of having accepted the stolen money. Now, I just want to say, we never, and I personally do not want the strained relationships between two countries to prevail. Botswana is a unique country. I've got a lot of respect for these people, and I've got a respect for what it stood for. Now, what I'm saying is that what is going to happen to the report that I paid for? This report, as you know, I'm also an ambassador of the Pan-African Parliament for Economic Development and Entrepreneurship for Women. This report we are going then to submit to the Commission of the African Union. That commission is chaired by President Thabo Mbeki and the former African Development Bank President, Kabaruki. He's also sitting in that commission. But also what I liked about the commission, the founder of the Global Financial Integrity organization that does a lot of these investigations, request that they do peer review on this report to double check the merits and whether it's authentic. But not just that, to go beyond that in terms of guiding countries, not to do that to former heads of states. President Khama's father, he was the first Black president in British Botswana land, that is now Botswana. And I'm appealing to the people of Botswana, please, let us not let the legacy of such great, unique leaders of ours be destroyed. I am also a product, and I'm also a protege of great man, my father, but also the man whose picture you see behind me, our father of the nation, Nelson Mandela. We will not steal any money from anybody. My family also, we are also contributing as part of the Bill Gates Giving Pledge. It went through the Motsepe Foundation. We are not thieves because this has affected the whole family's legacy and the legacy of all those Black people in Africa, especially the women in Africa. The legacy that they are now thieves, because if you're going to say Bridgette Motsepe and you look in your Google, you see I've been also very highly applauded by the Fortune Global 200 women, 10 of the women in Africa by Forbes. And our people are going to say African women are now thieves, and former heads of states that come from politically connected family are also thieves. Now, what I want to say is that I beg South Africa and Botswana to try and get closure to this matter. And I even personally went public to ask for Interpol to investigate. This has been a very difficult investigation for me because the chairperson of the African Union and the president of the country, as you all know, and it came over and over again, is my brother-in-law. So I couldn't even go to any of the South African organizations to assist me. I decided to go offshore so that no one should say we did this because we are politically connected and we are now helped. And that is why I actually say, please, Interpol, can you investigate? I don't even mind the FBI and to investigate because dollars were stolen. But now, as in closure, of course, it's clear. Alaco managed to get all the banks' responses. The banks are saying very clearly in the letters that they've written, there's no money ever that they received, and I can never be a co-signatory of non-existent accounts. The Reserve Bank of South Africa also wrote a letter to the effect that there's no money that they ever cleared, as per clause 19.7 in the affidavit that claims the Reserve Bank cleared 48 million, which is nearly 700 million rands, $48 million. And furthermore, we need closure. because it's not right. That is what is happening. I don't know, do you want me to answer the questions that were posed to me in terms of...
Just a moment first, ma'am. I would like President Khama to speak, and then the two of you will have the final say to questions. Is that okay, ma'am?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was Ambassador Motsepe. And you're going to have an opportunity to ask them questions right now. The next speaker also needs no introduction. That is President Khama, who is the predecessor to the current president of Botswana. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Madonsela. For me, today marks the beginning of justice for innocent citizens of our country here in Botswana, in South Africa, and others mentioned elsewhere, and also for various financial institutions, against whom false accusations of money laundering had been leveled against us by the regime here in Botswana. It is unfortunately a day of shame and a very sad day for our country, as irreparable damage has been inflicted on our long-standing reputation as a stable and a clean democracy, both here at home and internationally. As you have all just heard, the regime here has engaged in perjury by fabricating a false scenario of money laundering into offshore accounts by named individuals and institutions. Their clear criminal intent has now been exposed. Our hard-earned reputation of good governance and respect for the rule of law has now been ruined as a result of a very clumsy and irresponsible conduct and actions of a regime desperate to try and legitimize itself, tarnish the reputation of those targeted, and settle petty political scores. Such conduct and actions have included insinuations in the past of attempted assassinations, of coups, of poaching, and now this, all driven by self-interest and envy of legacies and livelihood initiatives that they could not match, and a false claim of being undermined or somehow destabilized by those they accuse in this instance. Hence, the threat to fix those that they targeted. It is the height, if I may say so, of stupidity and irresponsibility to throw away our long-standing reputation and our pride as a nation for good governance and human rights by falsely accusing a prominent South African citizen, a young Botswana public officer, a founding head of this country's intelligence service, a former head of state, and our central bank and national icon, the Bank of Botswana, and how it affects the financial services sector. Given this very regrettable turn of events, this is what us, the falsely accused, and I have agreed to do. First of all, we have decided that the report just released, which includes the fabricated affidavit, should be made available to the public and key stakeholders and interested parties, including all local and international media, civil society, international organizations, human rights organizations, and financial institutions, given that our central bank has also been dragged in through the mud, and also to all diplomatic missions. Personally, I and the other victims of this farce will be instituting the necessary legal action against this regime and elements within it as may be appropriate based on defamation and perjury. Furthermore, it is a clear imperative that we investigate the political motivation of the affidavit. The conduct of state actors in this matter is a clear demonstration of the violation of our laws and of our constitution, exacerbated by reckless and wasteful use of public funds with impunity in pursuit of a political agenda. I can only have hope that our peace-loving nation will not allow its conscience to be taken for granted so blatantly. Besides recent allegations of election rigging during our 2019 elections, clearly the current regime has lost any claim to legitimacy as they do not have credibility. If they can deliberately resort to criminal fabrication, is there any doubt they manipulated the election? Whatever may be left of their conscience should be reason enough for them to voluntarily relinquish power and pave way for the holding of free, fair, and this time credible elections, as they have now, after these revelations, been exposed to be untrustworthy and therefore unfit to manage the affairs of our state. Our culture and our tradition of democracy took many years to build. No government previous to this current regime has ever taken this for granted until now. We have always maintained the separation of roles between the public service and the political leadership. All this is now being wiped out by gross acts of foolishness, irresponsibility, political intolerance, and victimization of those who defend good causes and refuse to succumb to intimidation. Last but not least, and in closing, I would like to thank Mrs. Cherie Blair and her international law firm, Omnia Strategy, and Alaco, a leading business, intelligence and investigation firm, our team of lawyers here in Botswana and South Africa, and today's moderator, Professor Thuli Madonsela, for the incredible work in bringing forth evidence of state-sponsored crime by the current Botswana regime. And I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency President Khama. Thank you also to Ambassador Motsepe. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask Your Excellency, His Excellency President Khama, to answer two questions. Ambassador Motsepe's lawyer and an ambassador could also join in and answer. And then sadly, we may have to conclude this in the next 8 minutes. The first question to you, President Khama, is, are you not concerned that the Botswana authorities will rubbish the report and possibly try the accused persons in a court of law? The second question, I would like you to answer them together. The second question from Norma Bolani from the SABC News says, beyond your research, no, this one will go to the investigators. The last question for you, President Khama, is from Sinikiwe Chananeni. Will you be using this report to sue the government? And is Omnia going to be representing you in that lawsuit? You may have answered these two questions. The first one is, will the report be rubbished? The next one is, will you be suing, and will Omnia be representing you? Thank you, sir. And thank you to those who have asked the questions.
Thank you very much. And I thank you for the questions as well. I fully expect them to start rubbishing it. In fact, they have already been doing so as this press conference has been evolving. That's something we've come to expect of them, and is quite typical of the mentality that exists today in the regime. As to the second one, yes, like I did allude to, we will definitely be suing them. I think all four of us, I can't speak for them, but Certainly, I expect all four to sue them, and quite possibly those other financial institutions in South Africa and overseas, and the account holders who have deposited statements denying, and I know, I believe were very upset when they heard that their names were dragged into this farce. As for Omnia being asked to represent, that would really be for my lawyers, who I've already briefed to start legal proceedings of defamation against this regime. Is for them to reach out to whoever they think will assist them in the case in making our suit for defamation successful. I should also go on to say that we will be laying charges of perjury against Hubona of the Directorate of Corruption and Economic Crime. And we will also be, on advice, we will be pursuing the appropriate charges to bring against his boss, the prosecutors and their boss, because Hubona, you should understand, didn't just sit in his office on his own drafting this affidavit. Because I know how this government works, because of the nature of the personalities involved and of an icon like the Bank of Botswana, there's no way he could have done it without referring it to his boss, the Director General, for them to be given the green light to proceed. The same at the prosecution level. They would have also referred it to the DPP and the Attorney General. So all these we are going to be coming after in one way or the other, so that they have to account and ensure that, as Botswana, we ensure that the rule of law prevails as it always has done up until now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
President Ian Khama. Thank you. There is a question that I think I would be remiss if I don't allow you to answer, even though we're running out of time. It's from two people, Sophie Mukwena and Pule Lenswiti. President Ian Khama, Botswana has secured services of the AfriForum's legal team in South Africa, led by Ferinel. What is your reaction? Are you both going to take action against authorities in Botswana? And in this particular case, you may choose to ask advocate, you may choose to ask your legal representative, Milo, and Dario Milo from Weber Wenzel to answer this question, or Advocate Mac from Botswana to answer this question. A related question is Lobby Group AfriForum, representing the Botswana government, is filing papers this week to force the Department of Justice in the Republic of South Africa to cooperate with the legal mutual agreement. If the authorities of Botswana do not use this report in court, what happens next? Can we have the teams? But it's your choice, Excellencies, Ambassador Motsepe and President Khama. You could answer these questions yourselves, or you could ask the legal team to answer these questions.
President Khama.
Well, from my side, I really have got nothing to say about AfriForum, nor who the government Botswana chooses to assist them in this fabricated case. And I would therefore defer to the legal experts should they wish to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, President Khama. Ambassador Motsepe, do you have a word? Or Mr. Dario Milo, do you have a word on the legal process going forward?
Thank you, Prof. If I may, on behalf of the ambassador, because I represent her, 2 points. The first is, as President Khama announced, similarly, Ambassador Motsepe has instructed us to take legal action against the government of Botswana as a result of the falsities in the Hubona affidavit. And we are in the process of serving the relevant notices, and we'll start preparing papers in that regard for defamation of the ambassador's character. The second point in relation to AfriForum, of course, we have no knowledge of their proceedings against the government of South Africa, so we are not involved in that at all. But we would hope that the representatives of AfriForum, in particular Cherie Blair, who's a former prosecutor, will study the report that Alaco and Omnia have presented today and will ask themselves whether, in their opinion, a fair-minded, reasonable prosecutor would have prosecuted based on the true facts as has been presented here today by the independent experts. In relation to whether Omnia and Alaco will be involved in the case to be brought by the ambassador, because they prepared the report, they would certainly be part of the case as a witness to speak about their investigation, because their report will certainly be an exhibit or an annexure evidence in the case. Prof, that's all I would have to say.
Thank you, dear colleague. That was Dario Milo, who is an expert on reputational legal issues. Dear colleagues, we cannot answer all of your questions due to the interest of time. However, we will respond to some of your questions in writing to make sure that the story is completed. I've been asked, for example, what is my role in this matter and have I been paid? My role has been to review the findings, ask questions about the methodology, raise issues, and as you know, I was public protector, and as public protector, we use a particular methodology for investigations, which was what happened, what should have happened. Is there a discrepancy between what happened and what should have happened? If there is a discrepancy, is there an explanation? If there's no explanation, was somebody harmed? Did somebody suffer injustice? And if so, what are we going to do about it? So one of the first questions I asked was, why was this matter taken to the Botswana public protector or ombudsman, given the fact that basically the conduct complained of is the conduct of, firstly, Mr. Huboni, who penned the affidavit. Secondly, the Botswana prosecution that went public and went fully with the prosecution without just checking whether the allegations were making sense. So it is in that capacity that I was brought in as an expert in investigations and currently conducting training on investigations. Have I been paid? No. That was discussed and I avoided the question, but I will ask if there is anything that they have that they can pay towards student fees. We currently are owing the University of Stellenbosch for students that had been excluded at the beginning of the year because they hadn't paid fees, and my family put in their surety for those students. So any amount, any donations we can get from the public on this campaign that is called Action for Inclusion, it goes to student fees. I also had a rose named after me. They wanted to give the money to my foundation, We donated every cent, and we said any money that you pay and any donation we get from the Thuli Madonsela Rose must go to the Action for Inclusion campaign, which is about making sure that no student is left behind simply because they can't pay university fees. You have heard today that this report exonerates President Khama and Ambassador Motsepe of very serious allegations. It is my belief that the devastating findings are a stain on the reputation of Botswana and the investigation authorities there. Botswana was considered a bastion of democracy and the rule of law. This undermines that reputation. These allegations have not only tarnished the good names of President Khama and Ambassador Motsepe, they have tarnished the financial institutions in South Africa and Botswana. And in particular, they've put a stain on the Reserve Bank of South Africa, which is a globally respected institution. This report makes it clear that the allegations, like any of the bank accounts, are bogus. I hope that this matter will be taken up at the highest level of the financial regulatory bodies and law enforcement in Botswana and South Africa. Ambassador Motsepe said he couldn't involve the government of South Africa because, as you and me know, she is related to the president. But she is a citizen of this country, and there is a former president of a neighboring country that is involved. It's not possible that the governments of South Africa and Botswana should not be involved. And they shouldn't be involved in a manner that undermines the investigation, but they should be involved in a manner that questions the methodology. Because the very first thing that Botswana should have done is get in touch with the Botswana Reserve Bank and see whether money left that bank. And if no money left the Reserve Bank of Botswana or the Central Bank of Botswana, end of story. We don't need to know where the money went, because if there was no money taken away from Botswana, which is more than half the GDP of Botswana, then the story should have ended there. But while we know that there are many ethical and competent public servants in Botswana, it is a shame that the actions of a few have been allowed to have such a profound and damaging impact on innocent people. It is a tragedy that President Khama and Ambassador Motsepe have had to spend so much time, energy, and resources on clearing their names. Thank God, when something like this happened to me, I never had to spend a fortune to clear my name. They've had to do this because the real tragedy is that lies do stick, and you know it. We cannot allow perpetrators of fake news and disinformation, which have such a profound impact on our democracy and the rule of law, to go unchecked. My mother told me when I was growing up that your good name is the most important asset you have. It is unfair that the good name of several people, or the good names of several people, have been besmirched. I thank you for making the time to be with us today. You be the judges. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending.